The backyard was alive with the sound of children's laughter, squeals of delight bouncing off the bright-colored balloons swaying in the breeze. Sophie's 4th birthday party was in full swing. The bouncy castle, in all its red and yellow glory, was the main attraction, with kids hopping wildly like popcorn in a hot pan. The grill was smoking, burgers sizzling as I flipped them, the scent mingling with the faint sweetness of cotton candy wafting from the hired machine. I glanced over at the drinks table. The lemonade pitcher was nearly empty again. Without a word, I grabbed the refill from the kitchen, trying to keep up with the nonstop demands of being the host. Hosting was second nature to me, something I used to love doing. But today, something about it felt hollow. I shrugged it off. This was Sophie's day, after all. As I came back out, I heard the distinct sound of heels clicking against the pavement. My wife, Victoria, had finally arrived. She was late, again. But it wasn't just her timing that turned heads. Dressed in a sleek navy dress that hugged her figure, paired with designer heels and a sparkling Tiffany bracelet, she strode in carrying a large gift bag with Chanel's iconic double C logo on it. She looked every bit the corporate powerhouse she'd become, exuding confidence with every step. "Mommy's here," Sophie squealed, running to greet her. Victoria crouched down, pulling Sophie into a hug before presenting the oversized gift. "Look what Mommy got you, sweetheart." Sophie's eyes lit up as she tore into the bag, pulling out an expensive doll set that she'd begged for weeks ago. It was the kind of gift I couldn't justify spending money on, not with our budget. But to Victoria, money was just a tool, another way to prove her superiority. Victoria straightened up, scanning the party with a critical eye. "Oh," she said flatly, her gaze landing on the modest decorations I'd spent hours putting together. Streamers, balloons, and a hand-painted banner that read "Happy Birthday, Sophie," hung above the backyard fence. "You really went with this?" Before I could respond, her mother, Margaret, stepped in. "Well, Daniel's always been thrifty, haven't you, dear?" she said with a condescending smile. She picked at the paper plates and plastic cutlery I'd laid out, shaking her head. "No wonder Victoria has to carry the weight in this household." I clenched my jaw and focused on flipping the burgers, feeling the heat of both the grill and their scrutiny burning into my back. Aiden, my 6-year-old, tugged at my sleeve. "Daddy, look." He held up a drawing he'd made, a crayon masterpiece of our family standing under a rainbow. I ruffled his hair, forcing a smile. "That's amazing, buddy. You're a real artist." The smile didn't last long. The tension was palpable as Victoria sauntered to the center of the gathering. "Everyone," she called out, raising her glass of champagne, "I just want to take a moment to thank you all for coming today. It means so much to celebrate Sophie's special day with the people who matter most." I paused, hopeful for a moment. Maybe she'd acknowledge the effort I'd put into this. Maybe this time would be different. "And of course," she continued, "none of this would be possible without my career." She raised her glass higher, a smug smile spreading across her face. "I've worked hard to provide for my family and give my kids the life they deserve. It's not easy being the breadwinner, but someone has to do it." I felt my stomach drop. A few awkward chuckles rippled through the crowd, but most people exchanged uncomfortable glances. Margaret laughed loudly, breaking the silence. "That's right, darling. You've always been the go-getter in this family." Victoria wasn't finished. She gestured vaguely toward me, still standing by the grill. "And Daniel, well, he does his best. But let's face it, not everyone's cut out for ambition." She laughed lightly, as if it were all just a harmless joke. The humiliation hit me like a slap. My face burned as I glanced at the guests, parents from Aiden's school, neighbors, even a few of Victoria's co-workers. They avoided my eyes, some whispering behind their hands. My chest tightened. I set down the spatula, mumbling something about needing to step away. I left the party without looking back, walking briskly down the street until I reached the park a few blocks away. Finding a bench under a maple tree, I sat down and buried my face in my hands. The crisp October air bit at my skin, but I didn't care. All I could feel was the weight of everything crashing down on me. How did we get here? When did I become the punchline of my own life? I didn't notice Aiden until he climbed onto the bench beside me, his small hand resting on my knee. "Daddy, are you sad?" he asked, his big brown eyes filled with concern. I pulled him into a hug, holding him tightly as I blinked back tears. "No, buddy, I'm just tired." He pulled back, frowning. "Is it my fault? Did I do something bad?" I shook my head quickly. "No, Aiden. Never. This isn't about you." But as I looked at him, at the innocence in his face, I realized I couldn't let this go on. Not for him. Not for Sophie. If Victoria wanted to tear me down, fine. But I'd be damned if I let her drag our kids down with me. As we walked back to the house, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Resolve. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The Sunday after Sophie's birthday party, I found myself sitting on Marcus's worn leather couch, clutching a cold beer like it was some kind of lifeline. The TV was on in the background, playing highlights from the Patriots game, but neither of us was paying attention. Marcus leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his dark eyes locked on me with concern. "She said that? In front of everyone?" he asked, disbelief etched across his face. I nodded, taking a swig of the beer. "Called me lazy, Marcus. Like I'm some bum who doesn't contribute. And her mom. God, she just piled on. I've never been so humiliated." Marcus let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "That's low, man. Even for her." The thing about Marcus was, he'd known me since college. Back when I had ambition, back when I was a marketing hotshot climbing the corporate ladder. He'd been there when I met Victoria, back when she was charming and supportive. Not this corporate robot with a heart made of spreadsheets. He knew the sacrifices I'd made when we decided I'd stay home with the kids while Victoria chased her career. "You've got to stand up for yourself, Daniel," Marcus said, leaning back and crossing his arms. "This isn't about you anymore. It's about Aiden and Sophie. They're watching all of this. You don't want them thinking this is normal." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I know, but what am I supposed to do? Fight with her in front of the kids? That's not me, Marcus." He looked at me for a long moment before nodding. "No, it's not. But you've got to start figuring out what is you. Because this?" He gestured toward me. "This guy sitting on my couch feeling sorry for himself? That's not you either." Before I could respond, Rachel, Marcus's wife, walked into the room, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She hesitated in the doorway, biting her lip like she was debating whether to say something. "Hey, Rachel," I said, trying to muster a smile. "Thanks for letting me crash here for a bit." She waved me off. "You're always welcome, Daniel. But, can I talk to you for a second? Alone?" Marcus raised an eyebrow, glancing between us. "Should I be worried?" Rachel shot him a look. "Just give us a minute." Once Marcus had retreated to the kitchen, Rachel sat down across from me, her expression serious. "Daniel, I wasn't going to say anything, but after what you told Marcus about the party, I think you need to know something." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" She hesitated, then leaned in, lowering her voice. "A couple of weeks ago, I was at that wine bar downtown, you know, the one by the office buildings. I was meeting a friend for happy hour, and I saw Victoria there. She didn't see me, but she was with this guy." I frowned. "She has work meetings at places like that all the time." Rachel shook her head. "This wasn't a work meeting. It was different. They were sitting close, laughing, and she touched his arm in a way that..." She trailed off, watching my face carefully. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but then I overheard her mention his name. "Ethan Brooks." My heart stopped. "Ethan Brooks?" Rachel nodded. "Apparently, he's an old boyfriend of hers. I don't know the details, but she mentioned something about them reconnecting at work." I sat back, trying to process what she was saying. Ethan Brooks. The name stirred something deep in my memory, a faint, nagging thought I couldn't quite place. "You're sure it was him?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Positive. Look, Daniel, I hate to be the one to bring this up, but something about the way they were acting didn't sit right with me. I think you need to pay attention to what's going on." I wanted to dismiss it, to laugh it off as Rachel misreading the situation, but her words planted a seed of doubt that took root almost immediately. When I got home that evening, I couldn't shake the conversation. I watched Victoria more closely than I ever had before. It started with little things, The way she seemed to guard her phone like it was a state secret, how she'd disappear into the bedroom to take calls, always brushing them off as work. Then there were the late nights. They'd been happening for months, but I'd chalked them up to her demanding job. Now, I wasn't so sure. A few nights later, the doubt grew into something more concrete. I was scrubbing dishes after dinner, listening to Aiden and Sophie argue over what movie to watch, when I heard it, Victoria's laugh. Not her usual polite chuckle, but a light, flirty giggle. It was coming from the living room. I paused, my hands dripping with soapy water, straining to hear. "Stop it, Ethan," she said, her voice soft and playful. I froze. The name hit me like a slap. Wiping my hands on a towel, I walked into the living room. Victoria was sitting on the couch, her phone pressed to her ear. She looked up sharply when she saw me and quickly ended the call. "Work?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. She nodded, her face carefully blank. "Yeah, just going over some details for tomorrow's meeting." I didn't believe her, but I didn't press. Not yet. Instead, I just nodded and went back to the kitchen, my mind racing. The next morning, as I packed Aiden's lunch, I made a decision. I wasn't going to sit around and let this eat away at me. If something was going on, I needed to know the truth. The next time Victoria claimed she'd be working late, I'd be ready. I wasn't going to confront her with suspicions. I was going to confront her with proof. When Victoria told me that morning she'd be working late for an important client meeting, I didn't flinch. I played my role, nodding like the supportive husband I'd always been. But inside, I felt like a coiled spring, ready to snap. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the chance to put an end to the gnawing doubt that had consumed me since Rachel's revelation. After dropping the kids off at school, I called Marcus. "Can you watch Aiden and Sophie later? Something's come up." "You finally doing it?" he asked, his voice laced with tension. "Yeah," I said, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. "I need to know." By the time Victoria left for work, I was ready. I parked a few blocks from her office, reclining in the driver's seat of my old Honda Civic, my heart pounding like a drum. Hours passed as I waited, my eyes glued to the revolving glass doors of her high-rise. Finally, just past 4 p.m., she emerged. My stomach clenched when I saw who was with her, Ethan Brooks. He was tall, with perfectly styled hair and a jawline so sharp it could cut glass. He oozed the kind of confidence that came with money and power, the kind Victoria used to mock. Now, she looked up at him with a smile so intimate it made my skin crawl. They walked to his sleek black Audi parked on the curb. He opened the door for her, a little too chivalrously, and she slid into the passenger seat with a laugh I could hear in my head even from this distance. I started my car, keeping a careful distance as I followed them out of the city. The drive felt endless, each mile stretching my nerves tighter. They passed the suburbs, heading into the countryside, the buildings giving way to open fields and dense woods. I gritted my teeth, a sick feeling settling in my gut. This wasn't just a casual lunch or drinks after work. This was planned, deliberate. Finally, they pulled into a secluded clearing off a dirt road, shielded by towering pines. I parked a safe distance away, slipping out of the car as quietly as possible. My heart pounded in my chest as I crept closer, my feet crunching softly on the gravel path. I found a spot behind a thick cluster of bushes, my breath catching as I watched them through the branches. Ethan leaned over, pulling Victoria into a kiss that quickly escalated. She didn't hesitate, her hands gripping his shoulders, her body arching toward him as if they were the only two people in the world. Then it happened, the final blow. Clothes came off, and they moved to the back seat, oblivious to anything but each other. It wasn't just the act itself that gutted me. It was the passion, the way she gave herself to him so freely, so eagerly. A part of me had always hoped I was wrong, that maybe Rachel had misunderstood. But there it was, unfolding in front of me like some cruel, twisted nightmare. I felt a wave of nausea, the bile rising in my throat. My hands shook as I fumbled with my phone, snapping photos and recording video through the trembling lens. It felt wrong, invasive, but this wasn't about my morals anymore. This was about survival, about ensuring she couldn't gaslight me into doubting what I'd seen with my own eyes. When they finally emerged from the car, disheveled and flushed. I stayed hidden. Ethan lit a cigarette, leaning casually against the car while Victoria adjusted her hair in the side mirror, laughing at something he said. They looked so carefree, so comfortable in their betrayal. I waited until they drove off before returning to my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The drive home was a blur, my thoughts racing in a storm of rage, humiliation, and heartbreak. Images of them together played on a loop in my mind, each one more unbearable than the last. When I got home, the house felt colder, emptier. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the photos on my phone, my chest heaving with suppressed emotion. This wasn't just an affair. This was a calculated betrayal. She'd lied to me, humiliated me, and destroyed the family I'd sacrificed so much to build. My mind reeled, teetering between despair and fury. I wanted to scream, to punch something, to confront her and demand answers. But I knew better. Confronting her now would only give her the upper hand. Let her twist the truth and manipulate the situation like she always did. No, I wouldn't give her that chance. This wasn't just about exposing the affair. This was about justice, about making her feel every ounce of the pain she'd inflicted on me. As I sat there, staring at the evidence, a grim resolve settled over me. She thought she was untouchable, that I'd roll over and accept whatever scraps of respect she decided to throw my way. She was wrong. Victoria Carter was about to learn what it felt like to lose everything. The morning after witnessing Victoria's betrayal, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, staring at the search bar. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling with a mix of anger and hesitation. Eventually, I typed the words that would change everything. Private investigator for infidelity cases near Boston. It didn't take long to find Jennifer Walker. Her website was simple but professional, filled with testimonials from people who had discovered the truth they desperately needed. I called her office, my voice cracking as I explained my situation. She didn't ask for details over the phone, just told me to meet her that afternoon. Jennifer was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her early 40s, with a tailored blazer and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through me. Her office smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink, and the walls were lined with degrees and certifications that bolstered my confidence in her abilities. "Tell me everything," she said, leaning forward with a notepad in hand. I laid it all out, Victoria's late nights, the phone calls, the secrecy, and finally, what I'd witnessed in the woods. Jennifer didn't flinch, didn't gasp, didn't even raise an eyebrow. She just nodded, jotting down notes with the efficiency of someone who'd heard it all before. "Do you have any evidence already?" she asked. I handed her my phone, showing her the photos and videos I'd taken. She studied them for a moment before nodding. "This is a good start. I'll dig deeper. Texts, emails, financial records, anything that solidifies your case. Give me 2 weeks." Her confidence was reassuring, but it didn't make the waiting any easier. Over the next several days, I moved through life in a fog. I dropped the kids off at school, made them dinner, read them bedtime stories, all while fighting to keep the bitterness from seeping into my voice. A week later, Jennifer called. "I've got something. Can you meet me?" When I arrived at her office, she handed me a thick folder. "Before you open it, you need to prepare yourself. This isn't just about physical infidelity. There's more." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat, and opened the folder. Inside were printed screenshots of text messages between Victoria and Ethan, emails sent from her work account, and photos of them together in various locations, restaurants, hotels, even outside our children's school. The texts were the hardest to read. I skimmed through conversations where she poured her heart out to Ethan, calling him the only one who understands her. She mocked me openly, describing me as content to play house and lacking any real ambition. One message stood out. "Sometimes I feel like I have 3 kids instead of 2. At least with you, I can have an actual adult conversation." The words cut deeper than I thought possible. Every sacrifice I'd made for our family, quitting my job, putting my dreams on hold, spending every waking moment ensuring our kids were happy and loved, had been reduced to a punchline in her twisted narrative. I set the folder down, my hands shaking. "This is a lot." Jennifer's expression softened. "I know it's hard to see, but this will be invaluable if you're filing for divorce, especially if you're going for custody. The thought of divorce had lingered in the back of my mind for weeks, but hearing it said out loud made it real. I nodded, thanking her, and leaving the office with the folder tucked under my arm. That night, I called Marcus. He answered on the first ring. "What's up, man?" "I need a favor," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Alone." There was a pause. "How much are we talking?" "Enough to start a small business. I need financial independence if I'm going to fight her in court." Marcus didn't even hesitate. "Done. Just like that?" "Just like that," he said firmly. "You've spent years putting everyone else first, Daniel. It's time to put yourself first for a change." I thanked him, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. With his support, I started sketching out plans for a small marketing consultancy. It wasn't much, but it was mine, a step toward reclaiming the identity I'd lost over the years. As the days passed, I began preparing for the legal battle ahead. I met with a divorce attorney, laying out my case and requesting a custody arrangement that would give me full custody of Aiden and Sophie. Full custody is a tall order, the attorney warned. Judges usually favor joint custody unless there's evidence of neglect or harm. I handed him Jennifer's folder. "Will this help?" He flipped through the pages, his brows furrowing. "It might, especially if you can prove her relationship with Ethan interferes with her ability to parent." I nodded, determined. "Then we'll prove it." At home, I started noticing more cracks in Victoria's facade. She spent even less time with the kids, often leaving me to handle bedtime routines while she worked late. Aiden had started asking why Mommy didn't read him stories anymore, and Sophie clung to me like I was her only anchor. One night, after Victoria left for another meeting, Aiden sat on the couch beside me, his little face serious. "Daddy, are you mad at Mommy?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. "Why do you ask, buddy?" "Because you don't smile as much," he said softly. "And Mommy doesn't smile at you." I pulled him into a hug, my chest tightening. "I'm not mad at you or Sophie. That's what matters." But in that moment, I knew I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for them, for their chance at a stable, loving home. And I wasn't going to lose. Thanksgiving was always at Margaret's house. She insisted on hosting, treating the holiday less like a family gathering and more like a corporate event where she could showcase her wealth and dominance. Her dining room was a shrine to excess. Gleaming crystal chandeliers, polished mahogany furniture, and a table so long it felt like we were dining in a medieval banquet hall. I arrived with the kids just before dinner, Victoria trailing behind in a crisp white dress that screamed power move. She barely glanced at me, too busy scrolling through her phone. Aiden and Sophie ran ahead, eager to escape the tension that had become our normal. Margaret greeted us with her usual disdainful smile. "Daniel, you didn't bother to dress up?" she asked, eyeing my sweater and slacks like I'd shown up in rags. "Happy Thanksgiving to you too, Margaret," I replied dryly, walking past her into the dining room. As we sat down to eat, the air was thick with unspoken words. Margaret held court as usual, dishing out passive-aggressive compliments and veiled insults like they were side dishes. "You know, Victoria," she began, slicing into her turkey, "it's impressive how you've managed to balance such a demanding career with, well, everything else." Victoria smirked, sipping her wine. "It's not easy, but someone has to do it." "And Daniel," Margaret continued, turning to me with a saccharine smile, "you must be so grateful to have such a driven wife. Not every man could handle being the supporting act." I clenched my fork, forcing a smile. "Oh, I'm very grateful," I said evenly. "Grateful enough to make sure everyone here knows just how much Victoria has done for this family." Victoria shot me a wary glance, but I kept my expression calm, my voice steady. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The stage was set, and I wasn't about to back down. I stood, tapping my glass lightly with a knife to get everyone's attention. "If I could have a moment," I began, the room falling silent. "I'd like to say a few words about what I'm thankful for this year." Margaret rolled her eyes but said nothing. Victoria shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I'm thankful for my kids," I said, looking at Aiden and Sophie, who beamed back at me. "They've been my anchor, my reason for everything I do. And I'm thankful for clarity, the kind that only comes when the truth is finally laid bare. Victoria stiffened, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. Margaret glanced between us, her brow furrowing. "What are you talking about, Daniel?" Victoria asked, her tone sharp. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small remote. With a click, the projector I'd set up earlier hummed to life, casting an image onto the white wall behind me. The first slide appeared. A photo of Victoria and Ethan in the parking lot of a hotel, locked in an embrace. The room erupted into gasps. Victoria's face drained of color. Margaret dropped her fork with a clatter. "What the hell is this?" Victoria hissed, her voice trembling. I ignored her, clicking to the next slide. This one showed a screenshot of a text exchange. "Ethan, can't stop thinking about yesterday. You're incredible." Victoria, "Wish I was with you right now instead of stuck with him." "I hired a private investigator," I said calmly, addressing the stunned room. "These are just a few highlights. There's plenty more if anyone's interested." Victoria shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You had me followed? Are you insane?" "Insane?" I repeated, turning to her. "You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around, mocking me behind my back, and destroying the family I've worked so hard to hold together. If anyone here is insane, it's you." "Victoria, is this true?" Margaret's voice was uncharacteristically soft, her usual arrogance replaced by shock. "Oh, don't you dare judge me, mother," Victoria snapped. "You've been tearing Daniel down for years, and now you're surprised I'm unhappy? Don't blame her for your choices." I cut in, my voice cold. "She may have planted the seed, but you watered it." Victoria rounded on me, her face flushed with anger. "You're pathetic, Daniel. You can't handle the fact that I've outgrown you. This," she gestured wildly at the screen, "is just you being petty and jealous because you couldn't keep up." I met her glare without flinching. "This isn't jealousy. This is justice." Margaret finally found her voice. "Victoria, you need to." "No," I said, cutting her off. "You don't get to defend her. You've enabled this behavior for years, treating me like I'm less because I chose to put my family first. Well, guess what? That ends today." I reached into my bag again, pulling out a thick envelope. "These," I said, holding up the divorce papers, "are already signed. I'm filing for divorce first thing Monday. I'm requesting full custody of Aiden and Sophie, as well as alimony for emotional distress." Victoria laughed bitterly. "You think you'll win? I'm the one with the career, the money, and I'm the one with the evidence," I replied, gesturing toward the screen. "Good luck convincing a judge that you're a fit parent when you've been prioritizing your affair over your kids." The room fell silent, the weight of my words sinking in. Victoria stood frozen, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. Margaret looked like she wanted to speak, but couldn't find the words. I looked at Aiden and Sophie, their confused faces breaking my heart. "Come on, kids," I said softly. "We're leaving." As I gathered their coats, Victoria called after me, her voice cracking. "Daniel, wait." But I didn't look back. For the first time in years, I felt free. The first few weeks after Thanksgiving were a whirlwind of meetings with lawyers, court filings, and nights spent staring at spreadsheets for my new business. Every day felt like a battle, against Victoria, against the system, and, sometimes, against myself. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was moving forward instead of just treading water. My marketing consultancy started small. I spent hours cold calling potential clients, sending out email campaigns, and building a simple website to showcase my skills. Marcus's loan covered the basics: business registration, software, and a cheap but functional office space in a shared co-working building downtown. Slowly but surely, the work started trickling in. At first, it was local mom-and-pop shops who needed help updating their branding or managing social media. Then, as word spread, I landed my first corporate client, a mid-sized tech firm in Cambridge that needed a full marketing overhaul. The day I signed that contract, I sat in my car and let out a long, shaky breath. For the first time, I believed I could actually make this work. Meanwhile, Victoria's life took a very different turn. Word of her affair spread like wildfire, thanks to whispers in the office and a few strategically shared photos. It turned out Ethan's charm had its limits. When Victoria's reputation started dragging his down, he quietly began to distance himself. One day, I heard from Rachel that Ethan had been spotted at the same wine bar with another woman. I didn't feel satisfaction, just a dull sort of vindication. Victoria, however, refused to admit she was losing control. She fought tooth and nail during the divorce proceedings, hiring a team of expensive lawyers to paint me as an incompetent father and financial deadweight. She thinks I'm nothing without her, I told Marcus one evening over the phone. Even after everything, she still sees me as some burden she had to carry. She's scared, Marcus replied. People like Victoria can't handle losing. It doesn't fit into their worldview. But don't let her get into your head, man. You're already proving her wrong. He was right. The judge ultimately awarded us joint custody, but I secured primary placement of Aiden and Sophie. Victoria's partial custody meant she had weekends, but she was ordered to pay alimony, something that stung her pride more than the affair being exposed. To make life at home easier, I hired a part-time nanny named Claire. She was a retired teacher, warm and patient, with a knack for getting Aiden to focus on his homework and Sophie to sit still during story time. Claire picked the kids up from school on the days I had late meetings, making sure they had dinner and were tucked in by the time I got home. "Your kids are amazing," she said one evening as I walked her to the door. "You're doing a great job with them." Hearing that from someone who spent so much time with them felt like a small victory. Victoria's life, by contrast, was crumbling. Her demotion at work was a public humiliation, and she was reassigned to a smaller role with no direct reports, effectively a career dead end. Ethan had all but disappeared, ghosting her entirely once it became clear she was no longer an asset to him. Yet, even as her life unraveled, she refused to take accountability. During one of our custody exchanges, she couldn't resist taking a jab at me. "Don't get too comfortable, Daniel," she said, arms crossed. "You only have what you have now because of me. If I hadn't supported you all those years, you wouldn't have this money, this house, any of it." I didn't take the bait. "You're entitled to your opinion, Victoria, but the kids and I are doing fine. That's all that matters to me." Her scoff followed me back to the car, but I didn't care. My focus was on Aiden and Sophie, who were buckled in the back seat, chattering about their day. As the months passed, my bond with the kids deepened. Aiden had always been a thoughtful kid, but now he was starting to open up to me more. One night, as we were working on a school project about planets, he looked up and said, "You're the best, Dad. I'm glad you're here." The simplicity of his words brought tears to my eyes. "I'm glad I'm here too, buddy," I said, ruffling his hair. Sophie, meanwhile, thrived in the stable environment. She loved the bedtime stories we read together, often insisting on just one more as I tucked her in. On weekends, we'd bake cookies or have movie marathons, building the kind of memories I hoped they'd carry with them forever. One afternoon, after a long day of meetings, I came home to find Aiden sitting at the kitchen table, carefully working on a card. "What's that, bud?" I asked, setting my bag down. "It's for you," he said, grinning as he handed it over. Inside was a stick figure drawing of the three of us, with the words "Best Dad" ever scrawled in bright crayon letters. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't just surviving, I was living. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and that was enough. I found out about the accident from Margaret. It was late on a Tuesday night when she called, her voice trembling but still carrying that sharp edge she always had. "Victoria's in the hospital," she said, skipping the pleasantries. "It's serious. You should know." For a moment, I didn't respond. The anger I'd carried for months warred with the residual care I still felt for the mother of my children. "What happened?" I asked finally. "She was drinking," Margaret admitted, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. "She got behind the wheel and there was an accident. She's alive, but she'll never be the same." Victoria's injuries were severe. The crash had shattered her right leg and fractured her spine, leaving her partially disabled. She wouldn't walk without assistance again, and her days of climbing the corporate ladder were over. The drinking had spiraled out of control after her demotion, and she'd been trying to drown the mounting weight of her failures. Ethan had disappeared long before the crash, ghosting her the moment things got tough. Margaret moved Victoria back into her house to care for her, but even she wasn't equipped to handle the full extent of what Victoria needed. A few weeks after the accident, I got a call from Margaret again. This time, she sounded exhausted. "I hate to ask this, Daniel," she said, her voice uncharacteristically soft, "but Victoria's medical bills are piling up. The insurance isn't covering everything and, well, she needs help." I could have said no. God knows I had every reason to. But I thought about Aiden and Sophie, about how they'd feel seeing their mom struggle like this. Whatever anger I had toward Victoria, I didn't want my kids to grow up resenting either of their parents. "Send me the bills," I said finally. "I'll take care of them." Margaret let out a breath of relief. "Thank you, Daniel. I know you don't have to." "Let's not make this about me," I interrupted. "I'm doing it for the kids." I kept my distance from Victoria as much as possible, but I made sure she had what she needed. I covered her medical expenses, sent over groceries, and arranged for someone to clean Margaret's house weekly since Victoria couldn't. The kids saw her on weekends, and while those visits were tough, I never spoke badly about her in front of them. Still, seeing her like this, a shadow of the woman I'd once loved, was jarring. When I dropped the kids off one Saturday, she was sitting on the porch in a wheelchair, her face pale and drawn. "Hi, Daniel," she said quietly, her voice stripped of its usual confidence. "Victoria," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Thank you for helping," she said, not meeting my eyes. I nodded. "Take care of yourself. The kids need you." During all of this, my thoughts kept drifting to my own father. Growing up, he'd walked out on us when I was 10, leaving my mom to raise me and my sister on her own. For years, I hated him. I couldn't understand how a man could abandon his family like that. But now, watching Victoria fall apart, I started to see things differently. He'd left under different circumstances. No affairs, no betrayals. But the weight of responsibility had been too much for him. I'd always thought it was cowardice, but now I wondered if it had been desperation. And maybe, just maybe, he hadn't stopped caring even after he left. One night, after putting the kids to bed, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. It rang twice before a deep, familiar voice answered. "Hello?" "Hi, Dad," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "It's Daniel." There was a pause, and then a sharp intake of breath. "Daniel. Wow, it's been a long time." "Yeah," I said, running a hand through my hair. "I guess it has." We talked for hours that night, longer than we ever had when I was a kid. He told me about the guilt he'd carried for leaving, about how he'd wanted to come back but didn't know how. I told him about Victoria, about the divorce, the kids, and the way life had come full circle in a way I never expected. By the end of the call, I felt lighter. Not forgiven, exactly, but understood. Victoria's life remained difficult, but she seemed to find some level of acceptance in her new reality. She stopped fighting me in court, conceding that joint custody was the best she could manage. Her relationship with the kids was strained, but improving slowly, thanks in part to therapy I quietly arranged for her. As for me, my business continued to thrive, and my bond with Aiden and Sophie grew stronger every day. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And for the first time in years, I felt at peace. Because in the end, resilience wasn't just about surviving. It was about rising from the ashes and finding a way to build something better. 3 years later, life looked nothing like the broken mess I once thought I'd never escape. My business, Carter Creative Agency, had grown into a respected name in the marketing world. What began as a small consulting gig in a shared office was now a bustling firm with a dozen employees and clients ranging from local startups to national brands. The revenue I pulled in was more than I'd ever imagined, but it wasn't the money that mattered most. It was the pride of knowing I'd built this from nothing. One crisp autumn evening, I sat across from Marcus at a steakhouse downtown. The atmosphere was warm and lively, the hum of conversations mingling with the clinking of glasses. I slid an envelope across the table. "What's this?" he asked, eyeing it suspiciously. "Open it," I said, smirking. He pulled out the check, his eyes widening as he read the amount. "Daniel, this is the full loan. You didn't have to do this so soon." "I did," I replied, my tone serious. Without you, I wouldn't have been able to start this business. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. This isn't just repayment, it's gratitude. Marcus grinned and shook his head. Man, I always knew you'd make it. But damn, seeing it happen is something else. I'm proud of you. While my professional life thrived, I kept my focus firmly on Aiden and Sophie. They were growing up fast. Aiden was now 9, full of curiosity and big ideas, while Sophie, at 7, had become the little spark of joy that lit up every room. I made sure to be present for every soccer game, school play, and bedtime story. I wanted them to know they were loved, supported, and valued. And I wanted them to grow up understanding the lessons I'd learned the hard way. The importance of resilience, kindness, and integrity. Victoria's life hadn't improved much. She still lived with Margaret, struggling to adjust to her physical limitations and the emotional toll of her decisions. I made sure the kids spent time with her regularly, never letting my feelings about her choices affect their relationship. One day, Aiden asked me, Dad, do you hate Mom? The question caught me off guard, but I answered honestly. No, buddy, I don't hate her. She made mistakes, but everyone does. What's important is that we treat people with kindness, even when they've hurt us. It's how we move forward. He nodded, deep in thought, and I hoped my answer would stick with him long after the memory of the question faded. Then there was Sophia Allen, Aiden's former teacher. She'd started tutoring Sophie when she fell behind in reading, and over time, our conversations at pickup turned into long phone calls and, eventually, dinners. Sophia was warm, thoughtful, and fiercely independent. She wasn't just beautiful. She had a way of making me feel seen, like she understood not just where I'd been but where I wanted to go. We'd been dating for almost a year now, and for the first time, I allowed myself to think about what the future might hold. Do you ever think about getting married again? She asked one night as we sat on my back porch, watching the kids chase fireflies in the yard. I smiled, glancing over at Aiden and Sophie. I do, I said. But this time, it has to be different. This time, it has to be right. Sophia leaned her head on my shoulder. I think you'll know when the time comes. As I stood in the doorway of the kids' room later that night, watching them sleep, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. The betrayal that had once shattered me had become the foundation for something stronger. Life wasn't perfect, but it was full of love, hope, and possibility. And that was more than enough. Because in the end, I'd learned the most important lesson of all. Even in the darkest moments, there's always a way to rise. If you were in Daniel's shoes, sacrificing your career for your family, only to face betrayal, how would you handle it? Would you fight to rebuild your life from scratch, or would the betrayal be too much to overcome? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for being here. Don't forget to subscribe to Deceived Buddy so you never miss an update on more real-life stories. And as always, see you in the next video.